The silent era of cinema is one of the richest and most innovative times in human history. Never had a technology or an entertainment circumnavigated the globe with such scale and such speed that it made the studios and the stars that they represented into the modern pantheon of living gods. Even to this day, when we discuss the likes of Charlie Chaplin, Lillian Gish, Douglas Fairbanks, or Florence Lawrence, we talk about them with almost a divine reverence. And that reverence was even more prevalent when they were at the height of their fame and influence. So I have done my damnedest to ensure that the movies on this list are not the same tried and true silent era classics that you're used to seeing, so films like The Kid, The Lodger, Greed, Wings, Metropolis will not be on this list. All entries have to be from the silent era, produced between 1894 and 1929, so films like The Artist and Return to Babylon do not count. One film per director, and these entries include features and shorts. On with the show. Number 10. L'Inferno, 1911. I've talked about this adaptation of Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy on Screen Anarchy, and that is linked below, and yet it still boggles the mind how the Italian Impressionists at the turn of the century were so ahead of the curve. Besides being the first Italian feature film, full of stunning production design and grand set pieces, it also was the very first international blockbuster, taking in millions from foreign markets before such a thing was viewed as even possible. While utilizing the unique landscape of Italy, the power of its imagery-heavy source, and the design of a massive-scale opera, L'Inferno was one of the very first movies to capture the imagination of the entire world with its haunting and morose imagery. It lit a fire under the budding industry that propelled it toward being a worldwide phenomenon, making L'Inferno one of the most successful and impactful films in motion picture history, despite the fact that it has largely been forgotten. Number 9. Falling Leaves, 1912. This short film is elegant in its simplicity, a brief yet poignant story of a little girl vainly trying to help her dying sister. The film serves as a sincere meditation on the fragility of life, overflowing with bittersweet sentiment. While Italy was busy throwing together their epic through hell, one of the most innovative and pioneering filmmakers of all time, Guy-Blaché, crafted this film to be uniquely human and personal. This wasn't about what new wonders and alien landscapes we could now traverse, this was codifying the universal language of the silent cinema. There isn't much more to this short than a ride along with a naive little girl who wants to do right by her sister, but you should watch Guy-Blaché's work, especially now that she's getting largely rediscovered. Though, if you see on Rotten Tomatoes, I seem to be the only person who didn't dig on the new doc that just came out. Number 8. The Cameraman's Revenge, 1912. Stop-motion animation has always fascinated me, and while certainly not the first stop-motion ever made, The Cameraman's Revenge by Ladislas Statovich is equal parts exploratory medium, as it is a love letter to the technology and artistry that made it possible in the first place. Constructed from the corpses of dead insects with wireframe exoskeletons, this bizarre and morbid little short explores a scandalous family's melodrama through the slapstick antics of an over-interested photographer. If it weren't for the fact that carcasses were parading about in front of the lens, the movie is shot, edited, and paced much like many of the other similar plots at the time, yet due to its unique aesthetic, it makes it a uniquely singular cinematic experience. The animation is surprisingly smooth for the era, and the interactions between the characters have such a lifelike quality, it's sometimes possible to forget that we aren't just observing insect society that isn't visible to the human eye. Number 7. Orphans of the Storm, 1921. D.W. Griffith is a controversial figure in American history to say the absolute least, but the controversy isn't about whether or not the dude was a racist. He clearly was, even by the soft-handed admission of his closest friends and family. However, that doesn't stop the man from being a landmark and groundbreaking filmmaker. Based off the 1874 French play Les Deux Orphelins by Adolphe de Henry and Eugène Cormont, Orphans of the Storm is set in the run-up to the French Revolution, with Griffith co-opting the boiling conflict between peasant and noble classes as a cautionary tale against the rise of Bolshevism. Now, I don't find his metaphors all that fantastic, or accurate for that matter, as Griffith was never a man of many subtleties, but what makes Orphans of the Storm truly compelling is the chemistry between real-life sisters Lillian and Dorothy Gish, and the exemplary sense of suspense and anticipation that oozes from every set piece and subplot presented. It's got every ounce of juicy melodrama and posturing we've all come to expect and adore about this era of movies, with the epicness of major studio backing and the cinematography of the legendary Billy Bitzer to make it all the more impressive. While it certainly has not dated as well as some of his other projects, but not nearly as bad as others, Orphans of the Storm remains one of Griffith's more resounding successes in style and spectacle. Number 6. A Page of Madness, 1926. This entry came very close to being a lost film, and was thankfully rediscovered in 1971 by the film's director Tenosuke Kinagasa. Constructed by the experimental Japanese artist collective known as the Shinkankakuwa, or the School of New Perceptions, whose public mission was to divorce as far from Japanese classic storytelling as possible, this film follows a janitor working at an insane asylum. While containing no intertitles to provide context or dialogue, and the only surviving print is missing nearly a third of the final cut, we are still able to slowly piece together why he is working there and why his wife, unbeknownst to his bosses, is likewise detained there. It concludes in wacky, feverish imagery built of shared insanity and intoxicating delusions, and honestly, is far better than the socially forced ending Robert Vina had to add to the cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Impressing almost as a hodgepodge of expressionistic and impressionistic narrative and aesthetic tropes, A Page of Madness is one of the earliest and most effective examples of exploring mental illness in filmmaking, with the illnesses of our characters equally mirrored in the filmmaking itself. Number 5. Within Our Gates, 1920. Oscar Micheaux is quite possibly one of the most important filmmakers in world cinema, and I had to take a specialty elective on race film when I was in college to even first hear his name. Directed by the most prolific and successful black filmmaker in early 20th century America, Within Our Gates is without any doubt the most disturbing film on this list. Why? Because upon its release, though it was not intended, it quickly became the counterpoint to D.W. Griffith's The Birth of a Nation, quite possibly the most socially toxic exploitation film in world history, made all the more potent by its major advancements in defining filmic structure. We follow Sylvia Landry, played by the indomitable Evelyn Prier, going north to raise funds for a rural black school in the deep American South. Soon, revelations about her family and mixed racial identity boil over, which drives the overall themes addressing racial prejudice and hatred, and the violence black communities suffer under systemic white supremacy. While the film has almost pedestrian-like camera work comparatively to the visual splendor of most of our earlier entries, it hits like no other by roughly depicting the near-inherent terror of being black in America, which is compounded by an unnervingly accurate lynching scene. I honestly have wanted to make a biopic of Micheaux for years now, and feel that his story deserves mountains more attention and commendation than it has received, and this film just might be the pinnacle of why he's so important. Number 4. Ménilmontant, 1926. Now, I have also written about this film on Screen Anarchy, which is linked below, so that'll give me license to gush over Dmitry Kirsanov's magnum opus, Ménilmontant, which I have called the birth of psychological horror. After a pair of sisters lose their parents to a gruesome axe murder when they're young, they move to the city as young women and quickly become involved with the same man. The split between these two and the ensuing tragedy, pain, and terror have been seldom matched in many other silent subjects, or as wholly relatable as we are given powerful performances by non-professionals on the streets of the titular neighborhood. Through its innovations with editing and composition, we are living alongside these characters rather than observing them. Their minds are our own, their struggles our own. Much like Within Our Gates, the film was designed for common movie-going audiences and was all the more effective as the struggles of the working classes are so fervently on display. By far one of the most emotionally rending moments in movie history is the scene where one of our leads accepts food from a stranger on a park bench, and it just breaks my heart every time I see it. Watch it, and you'll understand why. Number 3. Arsenal, 1926. Of all silent anti-war filmmaking, only 2 names stand up as masters: Abel Gance in his 1919 feature J'accuse, and Ukrainian filmmaker Alexander Vdovchenko and his chilling, absurd, impassioned rendition of the 1918 January rebellion in Kiev, Ukraine, which likewise spotlit the wider implications of the October Revolution. Separated into 7 episodes, Arsenal jumps between several characters, though mostly following Timish Stoyan, a former Arsenal worker and soldier, with Dovchenko seemingly operating the film with the commonly espoused idea that that whoever controls the soldier and the army's loyalty controls the larger nation, we are made to experience not only the grunts on the front lines of any conflict, but also to understand the idealistic aspirations of the Soviet Union at the time of the revolution. Now, there are numerous parts of this film that are blatant propaganda with almost consistent historical rearrangements and exaggerations to better suit the social rhetoric of the day, and all of this was lambasted by contemporaries and critics who are not part of the Communist Party. And yes, just like Orphans of the Storm, you cannot go into this film expecting a balanced viewpoint, but what Dovzhenko does extraordinarily well is make his cinematic send-up to the titular rebellion an overly ambivalent and pessimistic film, with a higher emphasis on almost a poetic emotional expression rather than a highly technical style echoed in many of his contemporaries. Dovzhenko was able to construct a vivid world full of fervor that is equally matched by his unrelenting depiction of widespread social violence and the cumulative toll during its aftermath. Number 2. Daydreams, 1915. Just as with L'Inferno and Ménilmontant before it, I have previously covered Daydreams by trailblazing Imperial Russian pioneer Yevgeny Bauer, which is linked below through Screen Anarchy. This film is near perfect for me, and I know that's a bit heavy-handed right out the gate, but it's honestly true. Following our protagonist Sergei as he grieves over the recent death of his wife Yelena, he slowly becomes overly obsessed with mementos of his deceased lover and loses his grip on reality. Through a stunning blend of old-school melodrama, cutting-edge techniques, and hauntingly beautiful aesthetic choices found only in Eastern European filmmaking, we experience Sergei's madness, isolation, and heartbreak in a manner second almost to none. Regardless of how tried the plot for Daydreams already was by the time it was released, its subtle, internalized performances and psychologically charged focus easily makes this film one of the most emotional melodramas ever put to silent film, and also one of the earliest examples of effective dread in movie making. Number 1. Alita, Queen of Mars, 1924. Yes, this tops my list. How can it not? Written by Fedor Otsep and directed by Yakov Protazanov, two of Imperial Russia and later the Soviet Union's finest silent filmmakers, this science fiction film follows Los, a young engineer who escapes his crimes on Earth by stealing a rocket and heading for Mars. After the Martian Alita falls in love with him, Los leads a populist uprising against the ruling classes. I know, I have a lot of Soviet movies with Bolshevik propaganda on this list, but holy shit, guys, their silent cinema was so damn good. We still deep-throat Eisenstein on Battleship Temkin all these years later, and yet we completely ignore the movie that directly helped inspire German Expressionism. The fuck out of here with that noise. The costume and set design is stupendous and wholly original. The in-camera and negative photographic effects by two more of the best silent filmmakers of the time, and the nuanced characterization amidst the social commentary make for a powerfully resonant film, and one of the most imaginative examples of alien life and space exploration in silent cinema. Thanks everybody for sticking through into the end of the video. What you guys think of the movies? Is there any great silent cinema that I left out? Please let us know in the comments. Maybe we can do a part 2. If you guys like what we do here at Criticlysm, please make sure to give us some thumbs up, ring the subscriber bells, Patreon and socials all in the scribbly-doo, and I'll see you guys next time.
Made possible by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.